And so as I center right here within myself, I acknowledge that presence, that divine consciousness, and the creation of everything that is, everything that I can see, everything that I can't see, everything that my senses are aware of. And so I call this presence, this life, God, the beloved. It has many names. And I know that this is the source from which all is created. Everything is coming into being from itself. All that is this God, this presence, this life, this power. And because it is everything, giving of itself from itself, I know that it is love, supporting everything of itself, and that it is always present, always giving, always creating. And because it is all there is, I know that this is what I am. I am made of it. My body is its body. The consciousness flowing through me, through my mind, is its consciousness. And that I am open to all of it. And because that is my truth, I know that it is the truth of all. For that love, that givingness, that support is always present. And so as I speak this word, I know that as this season is upon me, that the change that is happening is always good. And that as I move through my day and my weeks, clearing, preparing for the next season, clearing away old beliefs, clearing away the clutter in my life, I know that there is a preparation of a fertile soil being prepared to accept more good, more love, more possibilities in my life to be expressed by this God. And I'm so grateful for this, for it is not work, for Spirit is doing the work in preparing the way for me, for all, to express and receive their good. And I'm so grateful for the way this happens, for the ease and the flow, and accepting all change as a new possibility in my life. I accept this perfect world, this Eden, this garden in which I grow and have my being. And so I release this with such gratitude to this one that is creating it right now. And I release it into its power, into that aspect that brings it into being. And I simply claim it. And so it is.
So it is. So, if you've been paying attention to the news in the last couple of weeks, you may have noticed there's been a couple of big hurricanes. Not here, but out there somewhere. And you may have also noticed that there's some people that have some ideas about those hurricanes, right? The government has planes up in the sky that are creating the hurricanes, and the meteorologists are directing the hurricanes. Anybody besides me see that stuff on your face? Yeah, okay. And it's interesting because, the people who don't believe that point at the people who do and go, you're crazy. And the people who do believe that point at the people who don't and go, you're crazy. And we get this nice divisiveness going, whether it's true or not. And these things called conspiracy theories, humans have made up stories about stuff for millennia, yes? Anytime something happens that we don't quite understand, either it's too bad or it's too good, we make up stories about stuff. In the Middle East, several thousands of years ago, a volcano goes off. There used to be a lot of volcanoes in the Middle East. You can go to, there's a couple places in the Middle East you can go and go through lava tubes and stuff like that. And most of us don't know that anymore, but it used to. It used to be very fertile and green, and then there was volcanoes and stuff. And so one of the volcanoes went off and it destroyed a couple of villages named Sodom and Gomorrah. And so we made up stories about that, right? Yes? God did that to punish them. The original version, by the way, was to punish them because they were unhospitable. They were unfriendly towns. And then a couple thousand years later, somebody else made up a different story about why God punished them. And we have all sorts of stories like that. In fact, the entire book of Genesis and most of the next several books of the Bible are all made up stories. Yes? Yes. To try to explain things that people didn't know, that people didn't understand, so the God must be doing it. I've always said that, if we were able to take a time machine back to, say, a time about, 3,000 years ago and land in some place that was having an earthquake, and people were saying, oh my God, the God's mad, we have to offer sacrifices to the God to please the God so that the earthquake will stop. We say, no, wait, time out, you don't understand. It's nothing to do with some God. We're on tectonic plates, and these tectonic plates move and shift, and like that, you would probably end up as the sacrifice to the God. Right? Because there's no understanding, there's no landing page for that among people at that time. And so we have to make up explanations. And so these days, the government has become the God or the devil. Yes? Yeah. For some people, anyways. As perpetrators in various acts. And this is replaced, if this had happened 5 or 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, whatever, Billy Graham and Pat Robertson would be up there going, that's God punishing all those homosexuals in Florida, or something like that, yes? Yep. And so today it's the government is causing this, and we keep making up these stories. Now, isn't that weird? Aren't those people weird for making up stories? Yeah, some of you know well enough to know where I'm going to go with this, because our ability to make up stories exists within all of us. We all have our conspiracy theories about our lives, yes? Yes? Something happens that we can't fully process, and we make up a story, such as, I'm not lovable. I'm not good enough. There's something wrong with me. I'm bad. I'm worthless. Because something happened out there that we didn't have a way of processing. We didn't sit there and go, my parents came from a really dysfunctional family, and they're just passing on this dysfunction to me, and I'm fine. We don't, at 3 or 4 years old, do that, do we? We don't have the understanding. We don't have the bandwidth. So we make up a story. There must be something wrong with me. Many of you know that I've shared before that when I was 8 months old, my mom put me into a Providence nursery down in Portland, which is where we were living. She didn't send me from here to Portland, but because she was not able to take care of me for 3 months. And so I formulated, as an 8-month-old, some idea that I had done something terrible wrong and gotten kicked out of the family. Now, for an 8-month-old, that's a very logical story, but that's not at all what happened, is it? No, she was sick. She was sick with her next pregnancy, and she just couldn't handle it. And it wasn't until probably in my 40s that I had a practitioner and who I was working with about this story who said, your mom probably spent some money to do that. And I went, oh yeah, my mom was a tightwad. My mom grew up in she's a child of the Depression, like many of us who are of a certain age that our parents were, or our grandparents were. And she would not spend money, and instead of farming me off to one of her relatives, she actually spent the money to put me in a place where I could get professional care. Shifted my consciousness about my mother and my relationship a little bit, right? Oh, yeah, I made up this story that's not necessarily true. So we all have these stories. And then we also apply these stories to others when we feel threatened, that they are bad, they are worthless, they are loving, and all of them, all of this kind of person, fill in the blank, is this way. Yes? You know what I'm talking about? And then we extend it to things like money is bad, because some guy who was sometimes brilliant and sometimes really strange wrote in a letter 2,000 years ago, the love of money, which is the Middle English translation, is the root of all evil. And even though it takes about 15 seconds to think of a whole lot of evils that have nothing to do with money whatsoever, we don't do that. We took it as gospel truth. And by the way, a few verses earlier, that same guy had told people that, said, you slaves should serve your masters with honor and respect in every way, which was a passage that was used to justify slavery for many centuries. Breathe. So enough of that biblical path. What I want to talk about is the conspiracy theories we all carry in our minds as a result of both conditioning or domestication, as Don Miguel Ruiz calls it, and as a result of experiences and the stories we make up, usually as very young children, that make the fertile, creative soil of our minds toxic. Last week I talked about having a vision, about naming our good, and becoming aware that at a core level we all know that there is a good for me and I ought to have it. At a core level, we are all light bulbs, yes? We talked about this last week. And I talked about, we need to connect to the source. Connect to the source as light bulbs. But oftentimes, as we grow up as light bulbs, we get covered over and covered over and covered over with film and junk and gunk. There might have been a period in my life where I was not a good housekeeper. Really, I know. And, it turned out that when I uncovered the light bulbs, that was brighter. When I actually dusted them and kind of washed them off a little bit, not while they were connected, I'm not that stupid, they were brighter. And so we're going to talk today about looking at the film and the stuff that covers our own light bulbs and maybe doing a little house cleaning of our consciousness house. Yes? So we know that there's a good for me and I ought to have it. But Emma Curtis Hopkins was so brilliant. She's a New Thought writer from the 1880s to early 2000s, early 1900s. Her last student was Ernest Holmes, who started this teaching here. But she also taught the Fillmores, who started Unity, and a number of other people. And she says, after she talks about naming your good and all that, she says, you will notice that the instant you acknowledge that there is good for you, which you ought to have, the thought arises within your mind that you do not have the good that belongs to you. Anybody besides me notice that? Okay. You feel, and she uses this word feel throughout this, you feel that the good is absent from you. This is known as the conviction of absence. The conviction of presence is not uttered. That is, we feel the idea of good being for us, but we do not say so. And we feel the idea of good being absent, and we keep saying so. Yes? You know who you are. I know who I am. We think that our good is absent. We say aloud that our good is absent. And I love this quote because it perfectly summarizes how our mind works. Yes? Yeah? Sam, can you put that chart up for me, please? We looked at this last week. We're going to probably look at it next week too. And so last week we talked about the top layer, the spiritual plane, where the ideal of anything lives, the ideal of beauty, the ideal of love, the idea of abundant good, the ideal of everything, and then how we use our intuition to move it down into the mental plane as an idea. So today we're going to talk about the next kind of 3 steps in that, which is we go from the idea to using our imagination to using our inspiration. If we are clear, if our light bulb is clear, we can take that ideal and move it down into a finite form in direct clarity without stuff in the way of it. However, if you notice in the middle of that, on the mental plane, you see those blocks there? Those are what we call mental blocks. And down below that, that creates what we call emotional conflicts. Can anybody besides me relate to this? Yes. Okay? We're really here to let that light, to let that top, if you will, express fully through us, easily through us. It wants to flow. And all we got to say is yes. But because we have these conspiracy theories, because we have these mental blocks, because we have all this junk running through our minds, we don't say yes very clearly or easily. We say, well, yes, but I got this story. I'm not really deserving of my good because I think there's a God up there who doesn't want me to have it. I think that I'm a bad person. Look at all the evidence, all the relationships that have proven that I'm not lovable. Look at all the financial failures that have proven that I'm not good with money. Blah, 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 blah. Yes? Yes? Okay. So our thoughts and our beliefs generate our action and our way of life. And it doesn't really matter if it's true. It doesn't matter if it's really true or not. It's our beliefs and our thoughts plus our feelings that generate our experience of life. And if the mind can't discern whether it's true or not, it's still generating that. If it has a belief that something's wrong with me, it's just going to keep generating experience after experience after experience of that, and it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. You know, I once had a friend who was working on a project, pretty big project, and he was getting magnificent support from all around him. But he had a belief that he was unsupported. And he kept saying, nobody's supporting me, nobody's supporting me. He was part of a men's group that I was in. And I remember one time in the group, we spent the whole time in the group saying, but look at this. Look at the support this person is giving, and this organization is giving, and this, and this, and this. And he's just sitting there going, I just feel unsupported. It was like he literally could not see what all the rest of us could see around him. I won't ask you to show your hands, but I bet you there's at least one other person besides me in this room who has had that experience. See, his mental conspiracy theory was of being not supported, and so he struggled on alone with his project. We live in a universe of infinite possibility, infinite potential, and we make up stories that we can't or even shouldn't have the good that surrounds us. Breathe. And then we let these beliefs and their associated fears run and ruin our lives. In the book, The Big Leap, the author Gay Hendricks identifies 4 fundamental beliefs, one probably for each hand, that limit our experience of the infinite good that is in truth ours to experience and live in. We're here to experience good. Not your neighbor for a minute. You're here to experience good. Say that to them. You're here to experience good, to live in and as good. There's no big guy in the sky that disapproves. Sorry. All of these beliefs that we have are crazy conspiracy theories that we have internalized. And so the first and the most prevalent of these beliefs is, I am fundamentally flawed. There is a way somehow where I am fundamentally flawed. I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough, etc., etc., etc. And as children, we don't have the perspective that the person who's doing something bad to me has some real issues, but I'm okay. We don't get that. You know, I remember when I was in my mid-30s, my marriage was kind of wobbly. My first marriage was kind of wobbly, and we were working with a therapist. And she gave us both books. And it was kind of funny because we were sitting on opposite sides of the living room at home that evening, started reading our books that we were assigned to read. And we both looked and realized we were both reading books on codependency, codependent relationships, right? They were different books, but we were both reading the same thing. We kind of laughed about that. And so I was 2 or 3 pages into Melody Beattie's Codependent No More, which was a classic book in the 1980s about codependence. And I remember I'm sitting here reading along, and all of a sudden this little voice goes off in my head and says, I'm not crazy. Now, I hadn't been walking around consciously thinking I'm crazy, but when I was in my teenage years, I thought I was. I'd write poetry about being crazy. I made 2 suicide attempts because I felt crazy. I knew that I was crazy. I'm starting to read this book and go, no, the dysfunctional family system in which you grew up in is what the term was crazy making. The system is crazy. It was a huge shift for me. And so we have this feeling that we're fundamentally flawed, and we don't have the discernment when we're young as children to say, I'm actually okay. They're messed up, but I'm okay. As adults, we sometimes get to that point of, it's called narcissism. I'm perfectly wonderful. You're all messed up. So as children, we're usually taught that we made them do whatever, that we're wrong. And then if you add a religious belief that you're a born sinner, and even Big Daddy God thinks you're bad right from the beginning, it's easy to see where this pervasive belief originates. Breathe. And you can even come into a teaching like this, New Thought teaching, and reinforce that belief because we talk about how our thinking is creating our results, and we can take on the idea that, oh, I'm bad. I'm thinking bad thoughts, so I'm a bad person. Instead of just sitting there going, I'm thinking thoughts that are creating results I don't want. We can think that there's something wrong with us even in this way. Krishna Das, who's a Hindu chant person that I just love to chant with. I remember years ago I was sitting in a chanting with him, and he said in between chants, he said something to the effect of, we bring our personalities to our spiritual practice. We bring what we believe about the world into our spiritual practice, and rather than allowing the spiritual practice to conform or to transform who we are, we transform the spiritual practice into our view of the world. Does that make sense? We don't let spirit transform. My favorite example of this is Christians who take the Bible, and I'm sorry, I'm on a little tear here, but Christians who take the Bible and use it to justify why I can hate these people. Even though the Bible says, love everybody. The teaching of Jesus says, love everybody. But I'm going to ignore all that stuff, and I'm going to take this thing which is for something else and say, see, I can justify hating you because of this little section here. That's taking our personality and applying it to the spiritual practice. So we tend to do that. Then our second barrier is something called disloyalty and abandonment, which goes like this. If I truly shine, if I truly experience my good, I will be disloyal to my roots, and either I will abandon the people of my past who I love, or I will be abandoned, rejected, and perhaps even attacked by them. Breathe. Some of you know this one. We watch athletes or people who suddenly come into great success. Suddenly sit there and go, oh, I've got to go back and act like I used to act a long time ago. We reenact our parents' marriage over and over and over again, or their financial state over and over and over again, so we're not disloyal to them, yes? The third barrier, then, is a greater success brings a greater burden, and this shows up in 2 ways. First of all, if I'm already running the story that I'm a burden, then having more of me will be more of a burden. If I'm too much, then being even more of me will be even more too much, resulting in more rejection. And then the other way that it can also show up is experiencing the greater good is more work, even though good is ever present and not generated by more work. People like Bill Gates did not work 1 billion times harder than people who make a whole lot less money, right? We work with intelligence and focus. So even though good is ever present and not generated by more work. See, if you want to breathe more fully, it doesn't take more effort, does it? You don't have to, I'm going to work really hard at breathing more fully. You just breathe more fully. It's just awareness and choice. And then the fourth barrier is called outshining. And this can be a family dynamic thing. It's kind of another version of disloyalty. But it also shows up as the family dynamic thing is I shouldn't be better than my sibling or my parents, right? I grew up, school was easy for me. I tested well. It was just, I was a great student. And it was easy for me. My younger sister, not so much. And so I was always kind of being told, you shouldn't be quite so bright. I was taught to dumb down so that I could fit in. Anybody else relate to that? Yeah. To dumb down so that I could fit in. Don't be as bright as you really are. My ex-mother-in-law from my second marriage one time walked up to me, put her hands on her hips, and she goes, I know, my second wife's name was Joy. I know Joy's bright, but I don't see much of that in you. And I almost laughed at her because she was the only person in my life who'd ever said that I wasn't bright. I had teachers who told me I was too bright for my own good when I was young, right? So we get this family dynamic of we should not outshine. It also shows up in a little different way as I shouldn't want or have more good until everyone on the planet has all their good. Because my having my good will take it away from others. Breathe. Somehow or other, if I'm fully loved, others will not have as much love. If I'm totally healthy, others will not have as much health. If I have all the wealth I want, this is where it'll really trigger you, others will somehow not. It's a lie. These are toxic thoughts, conspiracy theories, which pollute the fertile garden, the potential of the fertile garden of our minds, of our consciousness. And so these thoughts grow weeds instead of the lovely flowers, which are our birthright. And we need to address and remove them. Yes? Unless you want them to keep on producing those results. So Ernest Holmes points out that our minds can only affirm. He's kind of talking, Emmett Curtis Hopkins uses a process called denials and affirmations. He says, in truth, there's really no denials. There's only affirmations in the directions we want to go. So our mind points us in a direction which we either choose consciously or we let our conditioned beliefs choose unconsciously. And the best way to understand how you're thinking is to look at your current results. Yeah? Because if our thoughts create our lives, guess what? All we got to do to see what I'm thinking is just look, what's working and what could improve. And we look at it not from a place of guilt and reaffirming I'm flawed, which is where we can go into, but with compassionate curiosity like an investigator, simply exploring. My favorite question is, since the universe always says yes and always acts as a mirror of my beliefs, what must I and what am I really asking it to say yes to create this result over here? We just start to ask, what must I believe for this thing to be showing up? If I have relationship dysfunction, what must I actually believe about myself? Or about women or other people in relationships? And we start to ask that question. We start to just investigate, not from being the hammer out and beat ourselves up, but to just investigate. And this can lead to us to seeing the underlying hidden beliefs operating in the background, but showing up repeatedly. And then we can begin detoxifying by what Emma calls denials, which are simply looking at, facing our untruths and saying, no, wait a minute, you are not the truth of me. How many of you are truly unlovable? Good. And if you ever have the moment where you think that, you look at that thought and you say, you're not the truth of me. There's something wrong with me? No, that's not true. I am the magnificent expression of an infinite presence right here, right now on earth. That's why we come to a community like this, to remember and to be reminded and to be told sometimes for the first time who we truly are, so we can remember this. So you say, wait a minute, you can't be true, you're not true, and then we apply an affirmation which goes, because the real truth is this. Because the real truth is, I am a magnificent expression of the infinite oneness, or whatever it is. In order for this to really work, it does take truly understanding what truth is, because if I still believe in a mean-spirited, vengeful God, then I'm not going to believe that good and God and I are all one and the same. Yes? It takes clearing out those old meta-beliefs so we have a garden which has a base of good, healthy soil, which makes it easier to both clear out our old stones of our individualized thinking, and we think it's individualized, but it's really not. We're just a place where the infinite collective mind shows up individually saying, I'm not good enough. And then even more so to be a fertile garden in which good is naturally all around us, within us, and can land and grow. And so that is our work. And it takes work. Like a gardener, we have to maintain that garden regularly. Any of you who do gardening, you know that you don't just plant a garden and walk away and expect it to be wonderful 6 months later, yes? Yeah, I know Kathy's a major gardener, and I like to garden, and it's like, you got to maintain it. You got to do stuff. You got to pull out the weeds that want to land, because there's always weed thoughts floating through the air, yes? Okay, and so we've got to maintain it. We've got to remind ourselves. So this week, 3 spiritual practices. Number 1, choose an area of your life where you would love to experience greater good. Take a moment, just think about what that might be. And then ask, as an explorer with compassionate curiosity, I want you to hear that part. As an explorer with compassionate curiosity, what seed thoughts must I have planted there that are creating my current results? If I've got results that I don't want, what are the seed thoughts that I've been planting that are creating these current results? And tune into your intuition and your inner wisdom to guide you in understanding and being aware of that process. And it's just noticing. It's not going, oh my God, look at me, I'm a terrible person because I believe whatever. No, just notice. Oh God, I got that thing going on. When I pull weeds out of my garden, I don't sit there and go, oh, I'm a terrible person because I let weeds grow in my garden. Kathy, do you do that? But it's not true. That's the first practice. Choose an area. Secondly, speak to those thoughts saying, you're not the truth of me. Whatever it is, you're not the truth of me. And then third, we affirm. We choose the highest, truest thoughts, the thoughts of your perfection, your magnificence, of your immersion in infinite love, and speak those thoughts, planting them deeply. Are you willing to play with those 3 practices this week? Let's try that again. Are you willing? Are you excited about playing? This is one of the most powerful things you can do to shift your life. We have this motto that says, change your thinking, change your life. It's really change your belief structure, change your life. This is the deep down, dirty work we have to do. But there's powerful results from doing that work. I want to close with another Emma Curtis Hopkins quote. She says, all your noblest aspirations are to be fulfilled by being in full understanding of God. All of your noblest aspirations, all of my highest goods, all of what I want are fulfilled by being in full understanding of this infinite magnificence in which we are live, move, have our being, and are an expression of. As we expand our understanding of the divine, to get rid of all the old, this an angry, old guy sitting up there, what I call the Santa Claus God, making a list, checking it twice, going to find out who's naughty and nice. Once we get rid of that idea and start to expand into, I live in a field of infinite abundance, infinite good, infinite love, infinite wholeness, that's what starts to naturally show up. And I want to close with an affirmation. Say this with me. I am the master gardener of my own mind. I remove toxic seeds and plant seeds of good daily. How often? Daily. Yes, that's that maintenance thing. So let's try this again. I am the master gardener of my own mind. I remove toxic seeds and plant seeds of good daily. And so it is.